This is the afferent arteriole. It is a group of blood vessels that supply the nephrons with blood. It feeds into the glomerulus, supplying the capillaries of blood. The afferent arteriole has a wider diameter than the efferent arteriole, causing blood pressure to rise. The Bowman's capsule contains 2 layers of cells. One layer surrounds the glomerulus. The other layer continues into the renal tubule, which eventually leads to the collecting duct. The glomerulus is a cluster of blood vessels located in between the afferent and efferent arteriole. The glomerulus filters large proteins and cells that continue in the blood vessels of the glomerulus until they meet up with the other blood vessels. This lets the large proteins and cells continue to circulate throughout the body. The efferent arteriole carries blood away from the glomerulus. The efferent arteriole has a smaller diameter, which creates a resistance to blood flow, thus creating high pressure in the glomerular cavity. The proximal convoluted tubule is the coiled part of the renal tubule, which branches off the Bowman's capsule. It reabsorbs proteins, ions, water, and glucose. The loop of Henle is also called the nephron loop, and it runs through the renal medulla. In the descending part of the loop of Henle, water moves by osmosis. In the ascending section, the sodium-potassium pump is located there. Due to reabsorption, every time fluid goes through the loop of Henle, the medulla becomes more concentrated. The distal convoluted tubule is the most distal part of the nephron. It reabsorbs sodium and water while secreting hydrogen and potassium. The distal convoluted tubule is a continuation of the proximal convoluted tubule and connects to the collecting duct. The collecting duct runs through the renal medulla and is surrounded by the loops of Henle. The liquid in the collecting ducts are changed into urine as water and ions are removed from it.
The arrows represent the movement of fluids and substances throughout the nephron. The blood enters the renal artery and moves through the afferent arteriole to the glomerulus. After the blood is filtered through the glomerulus, it moves through the efferent arteriole. The blood continues to move around the proximal convoluted tubule and winds down around the loop of Henle. Down the descending side of the loop of Henle, the blood continues moving until it hits the renal vein, which moves the blood to the next nephron, and so on and so forth. Substances that have escaped through the filter move through the proximal and distal convoluted tubes to the collecting duct, which secretes urine. The glomerulus is in charge of filtration of the blood. The large part of the nephron is used for reabsorption of salts, glucose, and water. The collecting duct secretes the urine.
Several important substances are reabsorbed back into the bloodstream so that they don't go to waste. The body worked hard for these vital materials, and to urinate them would be a waste. Normally, molecules of glucose don't enter the nephron, but sometimes during filtration, some molecules slip in. To get them back into the bloodstream, osmosis occurs because there is no glucose in the surrounding vessels and the body wants the concentrations to be equal. Eventually, all the glucose is filtered out, and when the individual kidney is functioning properly, there's no glucose in urine. Water gets into the nephron all the time. To get the water out, osmosis occurs. This happens because the concentration of ions such as sodium is very high in the renal cortex and medulla, and the concentration needs to be equal. The saltiness kind of draws the water out of the nephron. This mostly happens in the proximal convoluted tubule, descending area of the loop of Henle, and collecting duct.
Ion reabsorption occurs in the proximal convoluted tubule and ascending part of the loop of Henle. The reabsorption of ions requires ATP and occurs by using pumps. The body wants a salty kidney, as previously mentioned, so that absorbed water can get out of the cell. It takes less energy to actively transport ions than water. The body wants to conserve as much energy as possible. Secretion of blood from the kidney occurs by the renal artery, and the blood goes on to the next nephron to be filtered again. The secretion of the urea occurs from the collecting duct and eventually to the minor calyx, major calyx, renal pelvis, ureter, bladder, urethra, and out of the body.